righty, it is 12:20, so I'm going to kick off and respect everybody's time and appreciate those of you that have rocked up just a little in advance, which is fantastic. Welcome along to another in our series of Lunch and Learns, which, as those of you who've attended the previous session will know, is primarily focused at the moment on the psychology that kind of sits around sales, and some of the kind of hardwired makeup. Today's is a little bit different, and we're focusing in specifically around the topic of, as it's on the screen, the self-talk that builds resilience in sales. And we're going to take a kind of dual view of this. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the research around all of this that was kicked off by a guy by the name of Martin Seligman, that some of you might be familiar with already. And then we're going to take a look at a particular instrument called the QO2, which is administered by an Aussie company called Team Management Systems. And we're going to have a look at the way in which that tool is useful for either you as a single contributor, or whether you've got a sales team that you manage. So for those of us who haven't met before, and I think most of us that are online at the moment do know each other already largely, but for people watching this a little bit later on who we haven't met before, obviously my name is James Michael. I'm the founder and CEO, which stands for Chief Engagement Officer, of Justified Talent. We're a boutique recruitment firm that specializes in working with small business owners, typically to recruit their first sales professionals. And over the kind of period of time since 2018 that we've been in operation, we've had over 10,000 people come into our ecosystem. And I'll just put that up there. I didn't update this from last week. That number has grown since then. But a lot of the material that I'm going to be sharing with you today is born of the fact that the way we go about recruiting is by getting a very, very deep understanding of the hardwired nature of the individuals who are applying for a sales role. And, we find ourselves in interesting times right now, right? There's no denying sales is tough. It has always been tough, right? Just the very nature of sales. I've dragged a quote here from a post that I put up on LinkedIn a couple of weeks back, and some of you may have seen this, but, as salespeople, absolutely every single day, we are subject to being rejected, being ghosted, being lied to, often on multiple occasions, elongation and delays that we have to kind of deal with, whilst at the same time, we're often up against a deadline, and that might be this month's sales, it might be this quarter's sales, it might be this financial year's sales, but there's a deadline, and I'm going to suggest it's a deadline that's very rarely ever extended for sales, where perhaps other roles that are internally focused will often, be allowed to kind of extend their deadline to some degree. We're up against an exacting standard of performance. It's very, very clear whether you're actually being successful in sales or not. You're either making sales or you're not. And so it's very easy for us to kind of be measured, as it were, but that adds to the stress load, knowing that we're being measured on a almost daily basis as to whether we're performing or not adds to the stress. And then there's the fact that there's constant competition, right? Nobody is ever selling to a prospect, in this kind of perfect isolation. There are always other contenders that are vying for that prospect's business. And so, that is inherent in sales. That's never been any different, really. But as we sit here today, times are getting even tougher. We find ourselves in, yet again, those interesting economic headwinds. I think lots of us are kind of hoping that the great Australian economic miracle might reveal itself yet again. But there's no denying that it's getting tougher. And by way of a very personal example, in the middle of July, as I looked at my pipeline and our forecast for the business that was going to land in August, we were forecasting $100,000 worth of business coming through. As we got to August, I will share with you that most of that evaporated, right? And so these were recruitment assignments that the business owner had said, "Yeah, I'm going to want you to recruit them in August." And most of those evaporated. In fact, we only did $15,000 worth of business. So, that's kind of adding obviously to the stress levels that we've got in our own business, but it's also an indication of the stress levels that small business owners are going through at the moment. And, perhaps a slightly kind of lower risk preparedness to take a salesperson on. So it's tough. It's always been tough. So what does that mean? Well, it means that one of the key things that's going to drive success of a salesperson is the degree to which they possess sufficient levels of optimism and resilience, right? So on the screen right now, you can see this pentagram diagram, this model presented. It's the way in which the QO tool is depicted. I'm going to talk a lot more about that particular tool probably down the back half of this presentation today. But one of the things that we're using in our screening suite now, and we put our talent through 4 or 5 different assessments that are designed to help us understand whether they've got what it takes to be successful in the role or not. And this is one of the tools that we really are absolutely, getting a lot of deep insight around, and that's particularly important right now. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But let me talk a little bit about where that tool had its origins. Some of you will be familiar with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Martin Seligman. He's considered to be the founding father of what we might describe as the positive psychology movement these days. And Seligman wrote a book many, many years ago. It was called Learned Optimism. Despite the title, it's actually quite a dry read because it's written by a PhD. So I don't particularly recommend the book unless you're kind of nerdy like I am and you enjoy reading all those kind of statistical variables, et cetera, et cetera. But what the book was designed to do was to help readers understand that optimism and resilience are actually learned behaviors. So unlike pretty much everything else that we test for, where we're looking for whether these are hardwired traits or not, it turns out that optimism and resilience are in fact states, not traits. And so we don't have necessarily a level of optimism and resilience kind of hard baked into us. It's something that we've learned to do. And it comes from the way in which we rationalize events and circumstances to ourselves, both real and imagined circumstances prior, during, and after the event, and they're all learned scripts, right? And so it's our self-talk which is actually fueling our levels of optimism or pessimism. And when I first learned that, and I came across Seligman's work now probably 28 years ago, that created a profound shift for me. Because one of the great things about anything which is learned is that it can be unlearned and relearned. And so, over that kind of 20-odd year period, from time to time, I've worked with salespeople to help them get a hold of the self-talk that's going on in their minds so that they can be more effective and that they can be more resilient. As Captain Jack Sparrow would put it, the problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem, right? So that's, if I'm going to simplify the way in which we build resilience in the face of adversity, it's about how we talk to ourselves about it. So the Seligman model particularly focused on 3 key areas, and what Seligman found through his research was that you can have 2 different people who are confronted with very, very similar circumstances. And let's for the moment use an adverse set of circumstances. 2 people might come up against very, very similar, negative and adversarial circumstances. And the way in which they rationalize those circumstances to themselves will typically have a pattern, and it will determine whether they either kind of fall by the wayside, whether they're overwhelmed by that situation, whether they curl up in a ball or not, or conversely, it'll determine whether those people not only survive, but in fact go on to thrive. And the pattern is around what we call the 3 Ps. So it's about the degree to which they personalize the circumstance, the event, the advent, the setback, whatever it may be. It's also about the degree to which they talk to themselves about how pervasive the impact of this is in their life in general. And then it's also about the degree to which they talk about how permanent this thing will be in terms of it having a long-lasting effect on you or not. So let's take a look at the personalization piece. It's all about ownership, right? And so what Seligman's work revealed was that optimists will disown bad news, right? Where pessimists will lay claim to it. When something bad happens, the person who is naturally inclined towards optimism, or the person who's learned to be optimistic, right, will invariably disown that and say, well, that's not my fault. I didn't cause that. That's not my problem. That's them. What can you expect when you're having to deal with, a group of people like that, et cetera, et cetera? That's the kind of language that comes out of them. The pessimist will say, oh, I knew that. That was my fault. I should have done better. I should have known that was going to happen. I, right? And so there's this ownership of bad news. Conversely, optimists are the cause of good news, right? So when something good happens, when they get a really good sale, or they get some really good feedback, maybe there's a good Google review, whatever the case may be, the person who is inclined towards optimism will absolutely take ownership of that. They will see that that's something that they did, that they caused. Conversely, the person who is pessimistic will simply see themselves as having been lucky. Right, it was just a lucky break. That was just, I didn't really have anything to do with that. That was just happenstance. They were always going to buy that kind of thing. So as we then dig into the next P, which is pervasiveness. Pervasiveness is all about the degree to which we compartmentalize the situation or not, right? And so again, when we take a look at negative situations, optimists will firewall the negative outcomes, right? They will not see that having just had this knockback has any impact on any other opportunity. It doesn't say anything about who they are as a salesperson. This is an isolated incident that has no ripple effect into any other part of either, my sales career or my life, right? The pessimists tend to universalize them, right? And so when something negative happens, the person who is inclined towards pessimism, their self-talk will be around the notion of, oh yeah, that's typical. That's just typical of my whole life. I've always kind of struggled with this kind of thing, and it's just kind of indicative of who I am and how my life is. And so they tend to kind of see this thing that's happened to them as being an indicator of the way in which their whole life tends to travel. Turn that around then, when the optimists have a positive outcome, they view that as being indicative of their whole of life. It's only natural that this would happen, that this good outcome has played out, because of the fact that's what my life is like. I'm pretty good at everything, right? I'm good at running. I'm good at taking care of myself. I'm a good father or mother. And it's an indication that it's only natural that this would be a good outcome because I live a charmed life, as it were. Pessimists, however, will downplay and they will minimize, right? And when the good thing happens in their life, what they will tend to do is kind of say, I don't know, I guess it was just right place, right time. It's something that I didn't really kind of have any particular control over. And so they tend to downplay and minimize good outcomes. So then to the final P, which is around permanence, and it's about this notion of always, right? Whether it's always like this or not. And so again, optimists see negative events as merely being a moment in time. It's a Polaroid, right? And there's a phrase that I have used many years for myself around cold calling, right? And in order to try and give myself confidence to pick that phone up and make that call. And so one of the things that I'll say to myself is the outcome of this call will neither make nor break me or my career or my business or whatever the case may be, right? So optimists see negative events as being simply a moment in time. It's a Polaroid. It's something that just kind of, evaporates within minutes, maybe hours. Whereas pessimists see this as business as usual. It's always like this. It's such a struggle. Like it's always so hard. Why does it always have to be this way? Is kind of the language that they're using. Optimists when they have the positive thing happening, well, of course, that's par for the course. It's always like that. And again, and this might seem like a silly example, but my kids will tell you, and my partner will tell you, whenever we go to a car park in a shopping centre, at some stage or other, as I've put the car into its parking spot, I will exclaim, "I always get parking." Right now, the fact that I might have driven around for 20 minutes in that car park looking for a spot, but eventually I get one, and so I will declare, "I always get parking." Right. And so there's this permanence about things that the optimists tend to kind of ascribe as being business as usual. This is how my life is. It's always like this. Whereas the pessimists, if they've had something good happen to them, they've had a good outcome, that won't last. I'm just waiting for the bubble to burst. I know, there's a train coming down the tunnel any day now. Right. So it's the 3 Ps that we talk about here. So now let's take a look at this tool called QO2. So QO2 is one of the tools that we use in our screening process for when we're looking to recruit salespeople. The QO2 is a tool, as I mentioned at the beginning. It's administered by Team Management Systems, which is an Australian firm that was founded many, many years ago by Charles Majerison and Dick McCann. And they've developed a number of really, really good pragmatic tools for use in the workplace. And I highly recommend the QO2 to you. And what this one's designed to do, and the name QO2, is designed to measure a person's quotient of focus on opportunities or obstacles. Right. So the Q is quotient, O2 is opportunities, obstacles, and that's what this tool is designed to measure. You'll see in the middle, so this particular individual got a QO2 score of 3.8. The average in the Australian database at this point in time and the population norm is, I believe, 2.2. I'm happy to be corrected if that's an old stat, but 2.2 is the number that I'm certainly familiar with. And what we're finding with salespeople who have the ability to keep on keeping on and to keep pushing through is they have a score typically of 3.0 up to probably 3.8, right? We probably don't want them to have a score much greater than that, because that's actually going to suggest that they may have rose-colored glasses on, and that'll become a little bit clearer in a moment, right? And so what the QO2, as you can see, as we'll kind of work our way around that pentagram, is designed to do is to get an understanding of 5 key things here. How much energy is somebody going to expend in the pursuit of goals, right? So this moving towards goals, otherwise known as MTG energy, is a measure of something that in psychological terms we refer to as motivational intensity. So it's about the level of goal orientation that we have and the drive and the desire to pursue and achieve goals and to deliver outcomes. Top quartile salespeople typically are showing MTG scores of 80% and above, right? As we head clockwise around, the multi-pathway section is the one that I'm going to suggest to you is super important in terms of the resilience piece, because the multi-pathways measure is having a look at the degree to which the individual will have an inclination towards overcoming setbacks, and the degree to which they will come up with different strategies to deal with delays, setbacks, failures, whatever the case may be. And so it's about, their mindset and the psychology that they have and the thinking that they go through, which will say to them, all right, this is, yes, a setback, however, and the degree to which they're going to be developing and then executing strategies to help them push through and past that. The time focus piece is, as the label kind of suggests, really an indication of the degree to which the respondent is focused on times gone by in the past, a focus on the here and now, or a focus into the future. What we're finding with most of the top quartile sales professionals, the people who have a consistent kind of, top quartile performance against their objectives, is that they'll have what we would describe as a balanced timeline, but with a slight orientation towards today and tomorrow. And so it's about having that future view and looking over the horizon. Typically, we're finding that in terms of the focus on the past, it's ideally a focus on how has this been done in the past that got a successful outcome. And so in terms of looking at precedent and guidelines, that's where they'll typically be going back to the past and saying, who else has done this before? How well did they do that? And what can I learn from that as I then kind of move forward? The fault finding score is also a significant contributor to resilience and optimism. And the resilience piece here is around the fact that, and I shared this in last week's presentation, but some of you will be familiar with that age-old kind of saying of the amateur salesperson is the one who knows for sure they've got this sale in the bag right up to the moment that they lose it, right? And so often they're taken by surprise. What we're finding with the top quartile salespeople is that they will have a focus on where things could go wrong. Where could this fall out of the pipeline? Who have I not spoken to? Who else somewhere else needs to do something else in order for this sale to actually go through? And am I in control of that in any way? Do I know who those people are? Am I managing that? Have I had that conversation? And so they're looking for reasons and the places in which the sale could fall out of the pipeline, right? Now, so, what we don't want is too low fault finding score because that's going to mean that people are going to be taken by surprise when things do go wrong or when they miss out on the sale or when they find, there's another competitor in play now. Conversely, you don't want too high a fault finding score because that can cause a degree of paralysis from analysis. And so, we'll find that people are kind of spending too much time digging into where could this go wrong, where could this go astray. And then ultimately, obviously, we've got the score there for optimism and the degree to which the individual's outlook on life in general is optimistic and the degree to which they see a future in front of them, which is desirable, which is, something they want to pursue. Okay. One of the things that I particularly love about the QO2 score is that it actually has a page, as you can see here, called the Resilience Index. So typically the report from memory is about 18 to 20 pages long. Each of the pieces in the pentagram that we've been looking at obviously has some detailed feedback for respondents. And then, you've got this resilience index score here, which is, is really, really, really valuable because increasingly, the evidence is showing us that high levels of optimism and high levels of resilience are leading indicators of likelihood to be successful in sales going forward. So one of the things that's really, really important then, if you're kind of buying into the notion of this, is that we all need to stand guard at the door of our mind, right? And by that, what I'm kind of talking about here is to what degree are we actually stopping and thinking about what it is that we're thinking? Very few of us would ever do that, right? It's a difficult process to go through. And so, going back to Seligman, one of the things that he exhorts and one of the things that, I've been teaching salespeople and founders for a good number of years now is what we call the CYT by 2. And so the first part, and this is an exercise that I take people through that typically takes about an hour to do. So we're not going to be doing that today, but it's around catching yourself thinking. So when, you're up against the adversity, you're up against a potential rejection, maybe it's something as simple as I need to pick a phone up now and either do a cold call, or maybe it's a follow-up from somebody who's been ghosting me. And if you've got any degree of discomfort about doing that, it's about stopping and catching yourself thinking, what's the story that I'm telling myself here, right? And one of the amazing things that distinguishes us as living creatures from almost any other living creature on this planet is this thing called imagination. When you look around you right now, almost everything in front of you, I guarantee you, will have been, a figment of somebody's imagination at some point in time, which has then come to life, right? Which is crystallized and realized. And that's why human beings continue to enjoy increasingly better quality of life. Because we have this capacity to imagine. However, the downside of that as well is there's a monster that lives in there that loves to play horror movies on your cinema screen, and it'll play it in 3D and surround sound with full Dolby, and it will put, the fear of whatever into your mind about what's going to happen. And so we need to catch ourselves thinking. We need to understand what's the story that I'm actually telling myself here that is possibly going to happen when I pick the phone up. And then the next piece is to go to CYT2, and that is to cultivate your thinking, right? I'm not going to get into a lot of detail in this presentation today about this model, but there's a model you can see here, the letters A, B, C, and then D, E. I will suggest to you, I'm going to suggest to you that there's a workshop that I'm available to each of you to run if you're interested, where I will teach you and or your people the ABCDE model. But essentially what it stands for is adversity, belief, consequential reaction, right? So when an adversity comes along, or there's a perception of an adversity is going to come along, you'll end up having a consequential reaction. Sometimes it's just a physiological thing. It's an increasing of tension. We grit our teeth, we grit our fists, the shoulders get tight, we get a nervousness going on. That's the consequential reaction. It's not actually the adversity that's causing that. It's the belief that we have. It's the self-talk, it's the story that we're telling ourselves and that we're absolutely buying into, right? And so when we can catch ourselves thinking by understanding what the belief is, what we're then able to do through the cultivate your thinking, the D and E, is to dispute the reality of that and to then develop what we describe as energizing statements. So to try and give you some sense of what I'm talking about here, in the MTG energy section of the QO2, if we take a look at the personalization, the pervasiveness, the permanence piece, there are warm-ups that you and or your salespeople can do, which will start to kind of increase your score, as it were, around your MTG energy. So you're moving towards goals energy, right? And so it's about having a series of statements, and I'm sure most of you, if you've been around sales long enough, you'll be very familiar with the notion of positive affirmations. I'm a little bit of a skeptic, I will tell you, about positive affirmations, because sometimes some of them will be fiercely rejected by the antibody, which is your subconscious. Right, I can stand in the shower and say to myself as a mantra, I'm a multimillionaire, I'm a multimillionaire, I'm a multimillionaire. My subconscious will say, well, if you're a multimillionaire, why is the shower so small? Or why is the water going cold? Or why are you not on holiday? Things of that nature, right? So our subconscious has this desire to push back on affirmations that it believes are ridiculous. So one of the things that's really, really important in building resilience is to be able to create these statements and to be able to prep yourself. So Anthony, I can see you've put your hand up. I'm going to do a Q&A at the end, if that's okay, because I just want to make sure that I don't lose track of time. Okay. In fact, I'm going to need to move very, very quickly because I am running out of time. So series of statements there, right? If we take a look at the personalization one, I am capable of achieving my goals because I have the skills and determination needed. I am in control of my effort and direction, right? By stating that to yourself, your subconscious is likely to accept that as being a reasonable and rational statement. And that will begin to build the confidence that you need to be able to make that call. When we come up against the obstacles, right? And we want to kind of train our brain to have self-talk around adopting multiple pathways. Then let's take a look at the pervasiveness one here. The ability to find a new path in one situation shows that I can do the same in any other. My adaptability spans all areas of my life. So again, by feeding this to your subconscious, by having these as mantras, by consuming these and standing guard at the door of your mind, you're building the resilience that is going to be necessary to push through. The time focus warm up, let's go to the permanence. No matter where my focus lies, past, present, or future, I have the flexibility to shift my perspective as needed to remain effective. Fault finding. Let's go to the personalization one for the moment. And folks, obviously this is being recorded, so this will be available for you to watch on YouTube later on. So if you're not kind of grabbing a hold of all of these at the moment, and I wouldn't expect you to be able to, they will be made available to you through that forum. So the personalization, being able to foresee potential obstacles is a sign of my critical thinking skills. I use this ability to prepare effectively, right? So it's taking a look at me owning an aspect of the QO2 concept and driving that and using that and educating my subconscious about the value of doing that. Okay, and then the final piece are on the optimism warm-ups. If I go to permanence, optimism doesn't mean everything is perfect now, but that I have the power to influence a better future. This belief is enduring and empowering. So, a series of kind of warm-up statements here that I'm going to recommend, and these are somewhat universal, right? And often as not, what's going to be really, really powerful is for you and or your salespeople, if that's the case, to be able to develop their own unique, bespoke statements. So what we've done here is we've kind of walked around the QO2 model and had a look at the ways in which we can craft perhaps some energizing statements, some self-talk, which are designed to enhance each of these. What I'm going to suggest to you is, and we're pretty much at the end of the presentation now, if you're liking what you're seeing and hearing here, and if it makes sense to you, there's a couple of ways in which we can potentially engage with you. Either through one-on-one, we can facilitate you completing a QO2 assessment. You'll get the deep report and you'll get a debrief one-on-one from me. Conversely, for those of you who are sales managers and you're thinking perhaps there'd be some value in exploring a workshop, we do have a 90-minute to 2-hour workshop that we can run with sales teams, which will teach them to obviously get an understanding of this subject, but then importantly to be able to develop those energizing statements that are going to help kind of really reinforce and build on their optimism and resilience. Okay, so the bell went off for me, so I'm going to pull up here and say thank you. I'm going to drop out of screen share and bring you all into view. Any questions, any comments, observations? Come on, don't be shy.
Really interesting stuff, James. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm also interested in, like, you've given us an excellent introduction to how positivity enhances performance. I'm also interested in how being around the negative people degrades our performance and drags us down.
Yeah, and it's a very real proposition, Bronwyn. And hence, back to that statement that I made around the need for us to stand guard at the door of our mind, right? The degree to which we're, and I often think of mental stimulation being somewhat akin to food. If I'm on a constant diet of McDonald's, well, eventually I'm going to become very, very ill, with all due respect to the good folks at McDonald's, right? Similarly, if all we're doing is consuming negativity, if we're consuming bad news on the news, or whether we're being surrounded by folks who are constantly complaining and whinging or who are suffering, then yeah, that absolutely has a ripple effect on us. And so it's incumbent on us to then go consume something healthy, right? You've got to go and have that bowl of vegetables and shove that into your brain.
So is that, you kind of alluded it to this early when I was a little bit late in, that then is the negative, and you may not be able to answer this, is the negative our default position as humans? Because there just seems to be an awful lot more negative people than positive people out there.
Yeah, no, it's not. And it's interesting because, when we do the various studies that we do, you get that whole range of people. And, there are people who are probably more inclined towards critical thinking, who will often be misperceived or misconceived as being negative. But no, it's not our natural default to be negative. The one thing I will say that is part of the default in some respects, and it's, the analogy is kind of back to the cave days when we were constantly under threat. And so we've certainly got the threat warning system hardwired into us, and we're looking for are we in danger in some way? And so that's definitely hardwired, and it can inform our perspective and our view of the world. But as we've evolved and as we find ourselves in different situations, that's less the case. All right. Anthony, you had your hand up a while ago. Andrew, I'll come to you in a moment. Amph, are you still around?
Yeah, I'm still here. I was accidentally touched the key. I think I got excited by your shower comment, James. No, I think for me it's more around. I really like the framework. I like the model for self-awareness, and I think that's something. Being a leader in my capacity and working with with younger individuals, I'm seeing that there's the biggest barrier to progress has been mindset more than anything else. It's not a I don't know the tools, or I don't know what I need to do in my job, or SOPs aren't right. It's usually hey, what are you saying to yourself in your head, and it's being able to draw that out of them. So I think having a tool like what you're sharing here is really helpful for that purpose.
Yeah, it's interesting, hey, of all the things that we get taught as we come through our schooling and university life, et cetera, the one thing we don't get taught really is how to get control of this and how to manage this. And yes, increasingly we're being taught, critical thinking and things of that nature, but we're not kind of taught to get control of the thoughts that might run rampant that are, not particularly healthy for us. Andrew.
I wonder, it was very interesting. Thank you, James. I wonder how much, if you're talking in particular relation to salespeople, and I'm thinking of business owners of small businesses like myself who work on their own, I wonder how much of this can be impacted by the notion of isolation. Salespeople typically work on their own. They're going after their own targets, they're going after their own customers. And when they're working on their own, the only thing they're listening to is up here.
Yeah.
Their own thoughts running rampant, sometimes in a positive way, sometimes in a negative way, obviously.
Yeah.
So I wonder if as business owners or leaders, we can facilitate connections within sales teams to have people able to discuss and talk. Because I know that once I've been on a phone call with someone or a call like this, I feel energized because I've had human connection with people. It's when I'm on my own on a Monday morning thinking, right, I've got this shit day ahead of me. The negative self-talk starts running wild.
Yeah.
If I make a phone call or someone calls me, then it seems to dissipate because I've had a human connection with people. I've had a conversation. I wonder how much it is about being alone on the job.
Yeah, it probably will be a degree of that, right? And there's that old saying of it's lonely at the top. Not that it's far from the bottom to the top for most of us in small business, right? But a couple of things I'll kind of pick up on there. I think certainly having interaction with others and being able to brainstorm and being able to feed off each other's is beneficial. However, it's also dangerous because if that's what we need in order to maintain, good self-talk and a state of positivity, then we're dependent on others. And so I think, therefore, it's all that much more important for us to kind of get a hold of that self-talk. And so, as you said, it's Monday morning, I've got that Monday morning shit to do. So instantly, like in a split second, an entire movie of doom and gloom will have played on the cinema screen in your mind, and you've kind of bought into it, right? And so what we've got to be able to do is to learn to CYT, catch yourself thinking, what's this story I'm telling myself? Where is that coming from? Is that true? Et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Be an observer rather than a participant.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Phil, I've seen your hands up, so I'll come to you in a moment, and Kirsten as well. I think I'm reminded of, when I first got into sales about 100 years ago, they used to have this thing in the car called a cassette player. Some of you are too young in here to remember those. But there used to be this thing called a cassette player, right? And my sales manager told me that I would spend the equivalent of 2 university semesters in my car driving from one sales call to another. Now, that's less the case these days because we're all online, right? But the idea was the cassette player is not in your company car for you to listen to music. It's for you to feed this, right? And so, of course, I was on a rich diet of Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn and all those kind of people. We've got to stand guard at the door of our mind. Phil.
Thanks. Great session. Thank
you.
you. I have to jump off. I know you mentioned that you'd be uploading to YouTube, but would you be able to share or willing to share a soft copy of those statements?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, 100%.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm actually going to create a document that I'll share with everybody with those statements and some others as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Got to run. Cheers, Jason.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you. I'm conscious that it's 1 o'clock, folks, which is meant to be our official close-off time. If you want to jump off, I understand. If you're prepared to stay around, that'd be great. You're off, Pete. Cheers, mate. Thank you for joining. Kirsten.
Quick one. In terms of retraining a salesperson, experienced salesperson, 10 years, 15, 20 years, in order to get a higher score or be more resilient, versus maybe a small business owner like Andrew suggested, who might not have had that sales experience but is running their own show and might have a team. How long does it take category A and category B to retrain or train this area up?
So in terms of the education piece, I find it takes about 2 hours for somebody to really fully understand and then to start to be able to effectively question. When we go through the ABC process of catching yourself thinking, what the subconscious will try to do to begin with is throw up superficial smoke screens, right? And it's not the first thing that we think is the problem that's actually the problem. There's something underneath that, and then there's something underneath that, and then there's something again underneath that. So it takes a while for us to understand that the thing that's causing the fear is not the thing that first presents itself. There's something much, much deeper down under. So it typically takes a couple of hours for that penny to drop and for us to then start to be able to create and use the energizing statements as alternative views, right? In terms of then having that become a discipline, I would say in my experience, it probably takes a good 30 days of constant use of it and disciplined use of it for it to really kind of sit and for the subconscious to accept it as being true, right? And I go back to the affirmation piece, I'm a multimillionaire, I'm a multimillionaire, I'm a multimillionaire. There's $2 million going into my bank account this afternoon. My subconscious says, oh, bullshit. Right. And so even when we start coming up with those rational alternative statements, it takes a while for the subconscious to accept them as being real. So long-winded answer from me as usual, but about 30 days. Okay.
James.
Billa.
Hi, you have time for another question?
I do. Yeah. Go for gold.
All right. So I'm a bit interested in the applications of the QO2 framework for sales leaders and managers, especially. What I've observed happens to salespeople, especially when they're answering questions or frameworks that their leaders or managers are using for improving visibility in the team, is that they tend to answer through a rose-tinted lens of their own performance. You understand? They know what results the managers do like, and they try to answer in a way that makes their performance or makes their personality match to what their managers want it to be. Now, it's entirely true that when they're doing it for themselves or when they're taking the test privately, they'll be answering very honestly. But it might not be the case when there's an organization or your manager involved. How is this addressed in the QO2 framework? Because if it does not, then I don't see a point in an organization implementing this in the first place.
I think the answer to that quite simply, Billa, and it's like so many initiatives that anybody in management rolls out in a business, it's always in the gift wrapping, right? And so it's about how you position what the tool is intended to do. If it's presented as being some kind of arbitrary measure of your worth, then the likelihood of you getting, true and frank responses diminishes. However, if it's presented and genuinely presented as, this is going to give us a snapshot of where you're at right now so that we can give you the most appropriate and tailored development, then in my experience, the people will buy into that, and they will be, frank and honest in their responses. So it's about the gift wrapping, right? And it's about conveying to people what the genuine intent is. If it's a stick, nobody's interested. If it's a carrot, then, I'm a happy donkey.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, James.
Excellent. Pleasure. Thank you, mate. Anybody else? Any more questions? All right. Has that been useful? Has it been thought-provoking? Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Good. All right. So look, from here, we'll put the recording up onto YouTube. I'll just put the QR code back. Oh, I'm not sharing screen, am I? Am I? I am. Yeah, I am. Okay. So QR code, I'll just move that out of the way. So if anybody wants to grab a hold of that, if you're interested in doing the QO2 assessment yourself, then we can do that. As I say, you'll get a personalized report and you'll get a one-on-one coaching session with me. So just reach out to myself and let me know that's something you're interested in. If you've got a sales team and you're interested in having a conversation about a bespoke workshop specifically for your people, then again, that's a conversation I'd love to have. And that's the thing that's probably is referenced via the QR code on our website. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate your participation. And yeah, we'll be in touch with you soon. As per Phil's request, I'm going to give everybody a soft copy document that has all of those kind of seed statements that you can take and use to your advantage. All righty. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, Toby. Cheers. Thank you.